Hey, and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about what is a remote. So basically, we have our repository on GitHub.com. We clone our repository so that it's local. And now, how are we interfacing with or talking to that repository that's on GitHub? So to give you guys an overview of what content's going to look like for the next few weeks, we're going to go through what is remote today, very high level, straightforward stuff. And then tomorrow through Friday, we're going to talk about Git fetch. We're going to talk about Git push, Git merge, and Git pull. That's going to rely on some of the things that we learned today, just what stuff is. So we're probably going to start with push, and then we're going to work towards merge. Merge and pull are kind of the first roadblock, I'd say, in Git to really understand and what adds value. After that, content's going to change a little bit. So we're going to focus on specific examples of different commands. So things like rebase and everything else like that. And then we're also going to look at some real world projects where so version control is kind of important or key, or how it's being used, as well as we're going to look at some case studies of like, I blew up my repo. What do I do? Right. And then past that, we're also going to look at some different specific tools that you can use to add value to your projects and work that are specific to machine learning. So there's a lot of different tools we can use. Git's definitely one of them, and it's a powerful one, as well as GitHub. But there are some other examples of great tools that we're going to work with and that you might see in the wild, so we should take a peek at them. So that's what we're going to do. So first things first, let's just talk about what a remote is, right? So as you can see here, a remote repository is a version of your project that are hosted on the internet or network somewhere else. And that's it. Okay, video done, right? I mean basically, yes. So remotes are exactly what they sound like. They are a remote version of your repository. So let's look at how that might look like. So I have here my little drawing. And let's say that we want to clone a specific repository. So we're going to clone this remote repository, and that repository is just going to be called, repo cool. Because it doesn't matter, just an example. And in repo cool, we have one branch, and that branch is main. So we don't have any other branches, so it's not a very complicated project. And then if we look at main's Git history, we're going to see a bunch of commits that are contained within main. And we're using the same notation we did last time to symbolize this idea of a commit history of these boxes with arrows pointing up, meaning they refer to the previous example. Okay, so that's great. And we want to get that into our local environment now. We know how to do that, right? So we can clone it. So we can come over here to our local, and in our command line, I'll put the little bash sign here. We can type in our git clone, and then we're going to refer to the address of our remote. So it might be, git@github.com : username /repo cool, right? Okay, cool. And so we get, at the end of that, we get a prize, and that prize is a directory called repo cool. And that has in it all the files that, all the files that would be in it. So that also has our .git directory, signifying the fact that it is a Git repository. So we have our local directory now, and we know that we can do cool stuff in it, like make branches. And we also know that it has a commit history, and that looks, at this point, identical for the main branch, at least, which is the branch that we get when we clone, assuming we've selected to only get the main. And then our Git history there looks exactly the same as the one for our remote repository. And you can kind of see where this is going. So I'm just going to get this out of the way. The remote doesn't have to be on github.com. It could be anywhere. So it could be wherever you want it to be. We're just going to use the simple case of it being on github.com because it's a tool that a lot of people are going to use and you're going to see it a lot. So when we clone this repository and we get all the stuff we have, we get our Git history, it's going to also create a reference to the remote repository. So we're going to have that be, it's going to be stored in our remotes. And now by default, it's going to create, so when you use the git clone command, it's going to create the reference called origin. So in our remotes, we will have origin. And all this origin does is point back to our remote repository. That's all it does. It doesn't, the name origin doesn't have a specific meaning. It can be whatever you want it to be. Just by default, it's called origin, but you can set it to be whatever you want. There are commands to change and rename and add and remove remotes. But for now, we're just going to talk about the simplest case, which is just this origin. Now, origin itself is a remote, but we also have this idea of a remote tracking branch. And so when we create our remote, we're going to get this remote tracking branch that's going to be pointing to main. And you can see this convention here where we have the remote here. So this is the remote. And then the remote branch here. So this is the convention you should get used to, right? So origin is a substitute name, or it's the address to our remote repo, and then main is the branch that we're pointing to specifically. And the reason that's important is because we want to be able to track specific branches, right? So we learned about branches last time. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them right now, but it's just important to know that we want to track specific branches of our repository. But the overall remote tracks the repository. It doesn't point to a specific branch. So that's all cool. That's all well. So how does that actually look when we're using our command line tool? So we can just go ahead and head to this repository. We're just getting the Git Good cloning repository. We're going to grab the SSH address. My face is in the way here, but if I scroll down, there it is. So we're just going to grab that. We're going to come over here to our terminal. We're going to see that we don't have the cloning repository, so we can safely type the command git clone git at github.com:chris-alexiak/gitcloning.git. Simple stuff, right? We've already done all this before. And let me just drag this terminal window to be a bit bigger. And now we can look at, okay, so how do these things appear in the command line tool, right? So first things first, we'll go ahead and cd into Git Good cloning. And again, we'll use the ls-al command to observe that we are in fact in a repository. We have this .git directory that indicates we are there. We also have, when we get status, we also have we're on branch main, and your branch is up to date with origin main. This is kind of our first hint to this idea of a remote. So how do we look at the remotes? Well, we just type git remote, and we can see here origin. And there you go, right? Like it just as we described, it's automatically added that. So what if we wanted a bit more information? We can use git remote -v, which is the -verbose flag. And that's going to let us see what exactly this is pointing at. So that's the address it's pointing at. And then we have two different versions, one for fetch, one for push. We're going to talk about those things a little bit down the line. But for right now, it's important to know that it has this reference, this address. So whenever we refer to origin in our git commands, right, that is going to mean this remote. Let's look at how we can visualize this a little bit better in our git log. So I'm going to open the git log, and you're going to see here are the commits for the git log. Nice. We have a bunch of commits. And this last one, we have this very interesting set of additional information, right? So we can see that right now our head, so what we're working on is pointing to the main branch. That's locally. And we can tell it's locally because it doesn't have any remote prepended to it, right? Versus origin/main, which is saying our remote, again, that's the name of our remote. So that's really an address / main, which is the branch, which is, if we look back at that drawing, right, this is the format that we're going to see pretty much universally across Git. And again, we have this origin head, which means the head of our remote is also pointing at this commit, right? And you don't have to worry about like what pointing at the commit means right at this second, but it is important to note that we have this idea of our local and our remote, right? So I'm very, very pleased about that. So what happens, say, if we make a change, right? So let's say we touch a cool feature. It can't be stopped. You know, I'm not a original person, unfortunately. And then we do our git status. We check and see that indeed, yes, we've added this file, but it is untracked, so we need to stage it. And how do we stage it? Well, we go ahead and we use the git add cool_feature.py. And now we know we need to commit it, so we can git commit -m added cool feature. And we can see we've committed that. And when we look at our git log, we can see that because we have this remote and this remote tracking branch, which is our origin main, we can actually see that we've left it behind, right? We've progressed forward one step, whereas they are still left behind in the dust, right? So that's a very powerful feature. And when we use our git status, I'm just going to clear the screen to make sure you can see this well, but when we use our git status, we can also see that we are ahead of origin main, which is the branch we're tracking remotely, by one commit, right? So, and it tells us what we might want to do to resolve that. In this case, it's suggesting git push. So that is the power of these remotes. It's a handy reference to the repository that we want to deal with. It can save us time, and we're going to talk about how when we come to pushing and pulling and fetching and merging. But for right now, what's helpful is that we can see how much work we've done in addition to what's already there. Now, this isn't like an active connection thing, right? It is not always connected and listening to and working with, that particular repository. It doesn't update automatically. So let's say we head to our repository and we want to get rid of coolest feature because we're like, we don't need that anymore. So we click on it. We scroll down, we click on the delete this file button, we scroll down, we just say, a default message, delete coolest, feature.py. It was no longer needed. Look at us with our sweet commit histories. And then we commit that directly to the main branch. Go ahead, there we go. And we can see now that there's no more coolest feature here. But if we go back to our terminal and we do a git status, we still see that our branch is ahead of origin main by one commit. And if we do our git log, we still see that our local repository thinks that that origin main is still on this old commit. And that's because Git isn't going to automatically update just because it feels like it. You have to do something, right? So one of the things that we can do is we can do like a git fetch. We're going to talk about this command a little bit more in the future, but for right now, all we need to know is that what it does is it's pulling some information from GitHub. It's not really doing anything else, but it is pulling that information from GitHub. And if we do a git status, we can see now that we have these diverged branches. So our branch main has diverged from GitHub's branch main. And the reason that it's done that is because if we look at our git log, you'll see that we have this particular commit that comes right after this particular commit. But if we look at GitHub, we can see, and we go to our commits. And so one of the things you can do in GitHub is you can look at the commit history with this little clock icon. And if your screen's bigger, it'll tell you, what it's for. And so we can click on that and see that, actually, there's this additional commit that we don't know about, which was for deleting that particular file. So in order to have the changes appear up to date, we must get the information from Git. So we must perform an action with the remote repository. So that's fetching, pushing, pulling, anything that syncs us with that remote repository is what's going to update our the information we have. So that's an important piece to keep in mind, right? What that means in practice is you'll probably want to be fetching fairly often. Before you begin any work, you'll want to fetch just to make sure that you know exactly what's going on in that remote repository and that your Git is up to date. And so, yes, the long story short here is that the remote is just and we'll go back to git remote-v. The remote is a alias to this address that makes it more convenient for us as developers to specify what we want to work with. And as well, we have these remote tracking branches, which let us be attuned to a certain branch, give us information about that branch and what's going on in that branch. And so for right now, we're going to leave it at that, but we're going to go more in depth throughout the rest of the week here as we work our way up to merging. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a good one.